Next up, I would like to welcome to the stage Krishnan Menon, Chief Client and Growth Officer of Wunderman Thompson, and his panel to discuss reaching the connected consumer. Please put your hands together. Thank you very much.
Hey. Oh, sorry, I didn't know my mic was on. I was screaming to a fan. So, how's everyone doing?
You want to move? Sorry.
Okay, they're obviously very awake.
I don't want to sit.
How's everyone doing?
Okay.
Oh, okay, let's try this. Good afternoon. Okay, I guess, we can just sit and have a chat.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. So,
The introductions?
yeah, let's do introductions. So, thank you for having us. Our panel is talking about the connected consumer. It sounds like it's a topic that should have been written in the 1960s, because was the consumer ever not connected, is the question, right? Back in the day, in the 1950s, when the 1-800 number was invented, they were still able to connect with a brand. So let's talk about what that means in terms of what the definition of the connected consumer is. But before that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Right, we've got Richa Goswami, who's the global head of digital for Johnson & Johnson Consumer Health. We have Bidhan Roy, who's head of SMB for Asia Pacific at Cisco, and we have Ryan Kim, who has a fan club.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you're a popular guy.
Okay, your team is here, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you're the ones who got the 5 free passes. So Ryan's from FWD, and we'll start with him since he's got the biggest fan club, and talk about point of view.
Yeah, so as you have just described, the term has been around for many years, but I think connected world now is actually the right timing in terms of technology, maturity, and stuff like that. I think it depends on which report you actually look into, but by next year, IoT, Internet of Things, through connected devices, will be reaching over 26 billion or 30 billion connected devices across all the markets.
Yeah.
That means a lot of things. One, we'll be able to actually collect lots of data from customer, and that means a lot of enterprise will be responsible for how to leverage those data. But is it going to be just for the sales purpose? Is this going to be the customer engagement purpose? That's us to decide, and depends on how we actually leverage those data through the connected devices. I think we'll be seeing lots of difference in like a Fortune 500 companies moving forward. So I mean, putting my digital hat, I guess the technology is now mature, and we're living the very exciting time frame.
Thank you, Ryan. Bidhan.
So in B2B, the connected consumer is slightly complex than I would say B2C, and nothing undermining the B2C. And the reason why I say that is when you go out and sell or market into an enterprise customer, at the core of every enterprise customer is the consumer. But at the same point of time, it really makes it very complex because of the number of personas, number of customer journeys that you need to do, number of processes that you need to deal with internally, and the customization is pretty widespread. So given all these things, the connected consumer, if you'd actually see, has become much more significant for B2B with the daily use of e-commerce and, as you mentioned, about IoT and things like that. So now the B2B companies are literally really sitting up and trying to think is that how do I touch the consumer, and not just in an enterprise, but the core consumer that exists in an enterprise. Just to give an example, like I'm sure what you use as a collaboration technology at home, you would love to come back and use it in office, and vice versa. So that makes the whole thing much more complicated. And I think marketeers and sellers in B2B companies are sitting up and really paying a lot of attention to it.
Thanks. Richa.
So when I think of connected consumer, I mean, if we start at the heart of it, I think you had consumers that lived in the offline world and then online world, and now with data, it's become a lot more easier to create experiences which are a lot more personalized. So if I just simplify and think of connected consumers, I think of consumers who are always on, and the journey is no longer linear. So you might have consumers who might go into store, test up, pick up a product, touch it, smell it, go back and buy it online. So you've got to be where the consumer is in a manner which is relevant and have a value exchange which has got meaning. That's my definition of a connected consumer.
Right. So you've all three summarized exactly what this world is about. There are complications of how you receive those signals, complications of how you use those signals effectively. How do you make sure that every digital identity of the consumer is used to deliver that most relevant experience that you talked about? So let's flip that question back on ourselves, right? We know the consumer is connected, so we're picking up signals of the consumer on the web, on mobile, through a CRM program, or through direct mail or whatever it is, or in store. How do we make sure as marketers that we are better connected internally as well? Because each of those signals are being picked up by different departments in our organization, right? So what efforts are you seeing in your organizations to make that work? Richard, do you want to start?
Sure. I shouldn't have sat here. No,
I'd have picked on you even if you were there.
No, that's true. That is true. So I think it's easier said than done. And I think for a lot of the startup disruptor brands, because they come up in a world which is data first and data fueled, I think it's a lot more easier than for companies like us which are incumbents. So we don't have dearth of data. It's just like you said, it's all over the place. So I think where we've started our journey in J&J is to identify the strongholds or the categories where we can play, where we have the data, the markets where it makes sense for us, which are more sophisticated, like maybe North America or Pacific is a bit more sophisticated than India, for example. And then starting to collect the first, second, third-party data and having frameworks to make sense of it. In some markets, we've got it nailed. In some markets, we're starting. So I wouldn't sit here and say we've got it all covered. I wouldn't have a job then. So it's a journey for us and one that we're on. So.
What about in the SMB world?
Sorry?
What about in the SMB world? What are you doing at Cisco to bring all the different silos of data together to make sure that...
I can go on and on. But I'll give across some highlights. So the way we have started looking into the market in the last 24 to 36 months is very, very different than what it used to be. And that's all because of the kind of significant customer journeys that we are really curating, carving it out for specific personas. So what we really do is that earlier, if you would actually think about that, a lot of B2B was all about choosing the right products. As marketers, we are very focused on customers choosing the right product and then using it across. There was very little efforts that was spent across in how the customer adopts it, how the customer engages with us. That particular piece of it has gone significantly higher. So as an organization, we have gone ahead and spent across or made quite a big investments around how does a customer adopt, and then multiple specific things, how do we do, be it in terms of providing them the content, taking them from a particular transition from one to another, and the whole host of things. That is something which is not just done by us as a technology company. I think every other company is doing it, be it technology or non-technology.
Sure. So Ryan, you have the added complication of regulation. So there's the challenge of bringing all the data together to make sure that you're using it effectively. But there's also the layer of how do you make sure that you do that in keeping in mind regulation, and regulations are much tougher for your industry than others.
Sure. So banking and finance and also insurance, we're heavily regulated business, and the usage of the data could be a big thing for us in terms of the impact and some of the influence it might cause. So you're quite right in that sense, but in terms of how we want to leverage the data, that actually doesn't change the dynamic. So basically, we're using the data to engage our customer in the better manner. And just a little bit about our company, FWD is a fairly young company. We have been operating 6 years, and we're Pan-Asia based, operating 9 markets. And interestingly, all of those 9 markets, the type of language that people speak and culture, and that means type of data we can actually get from each market is quite different. So we as a one enterprise is almost impossible. I think it's the same thing in every multinational companies, but the type of data we can get is very different. The usage of the data could be very different wherever you go. So we are actually coming up with the clear sort of definition of how we want to engage our customer, and using the data, how we want to actually solve customers' problem. That's the key philosophy and underlying sort of guideline for us. So that's the sort of like a mechanism being in place. That's probably because the competition we're having in the market are quite challenging. One, because of the regulation. Two, we are actually competing against those big giants who's been operating in this industry for more than 100 years. So it's also within our vision, because our vision is making people feel different about the insurance. So that's the underlying guiding principle. Coming back to your original question about the regulation, it is true, but I am also seeing the big changes within regulation spectrum too. It probably started from Europe, where the government actually allowed a open API and open banking sort of structure where all the enterprise can actually share customer data in a right manner. Hong Kong and Singapore, starting from those two big advanced markets, we're seeing government driving something similar. So I think by sometime next year or year after, we'll be having some of the open ecosystem where we can actually share more data with the customer, which is a good thing. But at the same time, we've got to be really mindful about how we use actually customer data and how we actually protect the customer data. That's why we as a company, we're actually putting lots of focus around the data security and cyber security and all of those like security related solutions. And I don't think we're doing something different from other parts of the world, but as an insurance company, which is a highly regulated environment, we're actually putting more focus around those areas too.
Thank you. Can I pause to ask your fan club how you did with that answer? How did he do? Did he do well? Okay. They're still your fans. Bidhan, can I ask you, going back to the SMB segment, right? How much of the data you collect from these connected customers are you using to enable your internal teams, and how much of it impacts the material you're creating that faces the customer?
So let's be real. So data is the new currency, as we know, and that has gained significant importance in the last few years. And last couple of years, more to say. And the reason because the kind of data that we used to collect from customers has gone through a significant change vis-a-vis what we collect today. It's a completely 360-degree view of data that we collect from customers, which is not just about, if I talk about a B2B customer, it's not about who is just coming in as a customer for me, and we have all heard about customer lifecycle journeys, but there is something called a prospect lifecycle journey that we go through inside our organization as well. So collecting information about someone who is not yet my customer, and how do I nurture that particular prospect to probably a white space SMB customer, to a prospect, and then to a customer. And then continuously take it across into how do they adopt it and then bring it back again and do this particular renewal process so that you engage with the customer on a consistent basis. So all these pieces of information of data earlier was pretty siloed. So that's something which we have trying to integrate the whole process. And I must admit that we are not there where we want to be, because it's a huge piece, because Cisco as an organization, multiple products and multiple customers and $1 billion of transactions that happens on a daily basis. So we have set out pretty well. We exactly know where we want to go in terms of engagements, which are the specific places that we engage with our customer and to who is going to do it across. The other piece that I would like to call it out is that many a times it earlier believed that it is the marketing and the sales organization who are the only ones who touch the customer, and hence they are the single source of truth, which is not necessarily true now. You have multiple divisions, departments in your organization capture customer information. So how do we really take that information and put it across into a single repository and then be able to make information or insight out of that data? That's the key success to any organization.
Thank you. So, Richa, can I, because of what you do at Consumer Health, obviously the connected consumer means they're also living in a world of high clutter, right? So how do you make sure that you're using signals you're receiving to make sure that what the consumer is receiving is more relevant and more value?
So, I get asked this question a lot, and I can go down the path and talk about, data and precision marketing and right time and right place and right passion point, and everyone's on that journey, right? So there's nothing different. But I think we sometimes get very caught up in all of that. And there's a part of me which just feels that what consumers want is a great experience. And they want an experience which delights them. They want an experience where they feel there's a value exchange. And as long as that experience is based on a human truth and an insight that matters, how it's delivered is that's not what they're as fussed about. So I know we get really hung up on data and the speed of mobile and creating stuff that needs to be fast and relevant and all of that, and it's true. But I'm still a bit old school. Like even if you look at Cannes and all the wins, like you think I'm a huge fan of the Burger King Ditto win, and you see how they've used data and how they've used digital. They've created a great experience. So I don't know. I think data is relevant. We use it. We use it in a lot of places for a lot of our brands. But I think it's based on what is fit for purpose for that particular brand at that point in time. If it's about awareness and it's top of the funnel, it might be addressed differently versus if it is more performance marketing-led, lower funnel, it's addressed differently where you need a lot more data. So I think we play across the funnel, and that's critical because you just can't be about one size fits all.
Sure. So it's almost as if we rehearsed this,
I did. We did.
So Salesforce released a report, which I heard about in the previous panel, where 75% of the people said, or might have been 73, said that they expected a really high level of high quality customer experience, but only 51% actually were experiencing high quality, right? So the expectations were not being met by delivery. And so when you say there's the connected customer is telling us everything we need to know about them, we're obviously not measuring up with what we give back. So how do you strike that balance of not being intrusive and not wanting to collect all of this information but do nothing with it? So I guess in your case, it might be about creating these experiences. So do you want to talk some more about that? And then we'll see how Bidhan does it in SMB as well.
Sure. So, someone said to me the other day that technology moves faster than people, and people move faster than businesses, which I thought was really interesting. So we're honestly just trying to keep pace with the consumer, who's then trying to keep pace with technology. So I honestly feel it's an never-ending cycle, and you can't catch up. But what you can do is with what you've got and the arsenal that you've got, you play the best that you can to win. So I'm not trying to give a really philosophical answer, but I think for us, honestly, it is just different brands, different countries, what we can do and how we can play is what we've got. So, and we know exactly what we can do and how we can do, and like you said, I mean, it's chartered and it's getting done. So, and going back to experiences, I think it can be small things sometimes which are also delightful. And the last point is, it's not always the brand that should think they are the ones that can create the experience. What do I mean by that? This is a huge opportunity for co-creation, collaboration. So we have a product called Petite Planet, which is a premium baby product, and we were launching it in Korea. And normally we would have done a big, typical launch, but we ended up going with influencers, and they created gift sets, and they created a lot of other products we would have normally never done. And that was a supremely delightful experience. Clean and clear black range in the US. We've signed up with twins, influencers, and within a year we came up with new products. So I think as a brand, you've also got to be comfortable giving the control to your consumers and interacting with them. So there are different ways, honestly, you come up with experiences.
Sure.
That's how I think of it.
So let me modify the question then. Let's talk a little bit more about the region, because all three of you have Asia-Pacific roles, right? Unlike any other geography in the world, when you say connected, in a Singapore versus connected in Indonesia, the definition is slightly different. So how do you strike that balance? Let's start with Ryan. Right, you said you have businesses in 9 different markets. Surely the level of connection with the consumer is different in each of those markets. So how do you strike that balance?
Sure. So in our industry, as you have briefly mentioned about regulation, I think connected and the type of data we can actually collect from the customer is actually depends on the regulation in each market. So that's probably what's been driving the different type of data collection points. But I think we're not the manufacturer or like we're not the consumer electronics, the goods services provider. So I think there are like only a limited number of data we can actually collect from customer using our the policy sailing and also the renewable policies and stuff. I guess the type of data we want to use and the type of data we want to collect from other partners' ecosystem will be the big difference. So, for example, we have our own channel called the Max, which is our reward scheme app. And through that, customer can, it doesn't have to be our own customer. Anybody can actually use that particular reward app to actually, she or he can actually get that registered and then use that as a sort of engagement model. You can actually link up with your health information from Garmin or an Apple Watch, and we can constantly monitor their health situation, which is not really different from other insurance players are actually doing. And for us, that's to understand customers, the lifestyle as well as their health status, and we give away points. And that's the sort of probably the first generation of actually leveraging customer data using our own channel. But going forward, what we want to do is being part of more ecosystem so that we can be actually part of the big chunk of the data with, and hopefully we can actually share those data set with other parts of an industry. It doesn't have to be only insurance or a banking players, because what customer want from us, and you briefly touched upon how Salesforce customer is not being really satisfied with all the experience. That's because using all of those data, we actually have the level of service we can actually provide back to customer is not really end-to-end experience. And if we want to provide customer end-to-end experience using those data, we need to be part of those ecosystems, because as an insurance player, there is only so much things you can do. But if you can actually partner up of different sort of industry, consumer electronics, payment, banking, I think this is the way we can actually provide customer back to with a highly high quality sort of customer experience, as well as this is probably the way we can actually make customers satisfied with the use of their own data.
Okay. Bidhan, what do you think?
So I would like to define it across in 2 parameters. I would probably say that the differentiation from a connected definition perspective from my business, from a B2B standpoint, is not that much varies by country to country, but it varies on 2 things. At the core of any of this connected consumer or connectedness, if you call it, is a set of human emotions. When you talk about it, there are certain implicit needs, there are some explicit needs. In certain regions, because of some cultural background, some of these implicit needs are more pronounced than in certain other places. So that's one variability that we deal with. The second variability that we deal with is that in SMB, we just tend to paint it with a single stroke of brush that everything is SMB, but we all know that there are very significant small versus medium versus SOHO versus individual. And when you go into the layer of details, then you find it out an individual implicit, explicit needs are very different from a SOHO versus a medium customer versus a small customer. So that's when you bring across a lot of information. And as Richard was mentioning, so it's not that easy to really get in across all the information that you get in and then segregate it across signal versus noise. You get across a lot of noise which tend to be believed inside the organization. Those are all signals. And hence, for this signal to be differentiated very clearly from noise, there has to be a pretty uniform definition of who the customer is and how do you want to interact with them in every emotion that you want to deal with.
Okay. Richa?
So short and quick answer is that you have every market believes that they're special and they're different. And I always go and tell them that maybe 20% of what you believe is a nuance, the 80% there's a lot of commonality. So I think when you're looking to drive scale, given the size of our business, the first thing at least I try and do is find common infrastructure, common things that we can then go in and build that as the playing field. And then of course you've got to tweak to meet the different markets and different consumers, right? So when we started the journey, it wasn't about each market being treated differently and building the same thing over and over again. It was identifying what do you do with this data, how do you create the audiences, how do you then act on that, what do you need to build as the at-par infrastructure, get that sorted, and then you can have building blocks that you tweak. So I think that's the only way you can move. If not, it just gets really difficult. And I don't think we have the luxury of time not to be able to move fast.
Sure. That makes sense. What about, so the flip side to a connected consumer is, or connected customer in your case, is that they have already done a lot of research before they get to you, right? Before they get to whether they're talking to an agent, in your case, or whether they're talking to your sales teams, or whether they've gone into a store, right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. We'll start with you.
Sure. It's the truth, and it always amazes me how far removed some of our marketeers are from that reality. And I think it's because in organizations, people sit in different departments. They think people live their life in different silos, you know? Like they walk into the store and that's where they buy. I'm like, no, they walk into the store, they open the bottle, they touch and feel the product, but then they want to go online to Amazon and shop. Or they want to do research online, and then as you're walking by at lunch, they just tuck into a store and they pick up your product. So that to me is truly more connected when I think of the O2O world that we live in. So simple things like ratings and reviews, you know, simple things like just having advisors trained on our products. All the basics have to be in place today, because if you're talking about the experience that our consumers want, it cannot be that, you know, we have a great shelf in retail, but then when I go online and I have an FAQ on why is this mascara better than the other, we don't have an answer to that. You know, and the amount of times we don't even listen to what questions our call center gets and then use that towards FAQs used to baffle me, because there's a wealth of knowledge there. So I think we are honestly trying to walk in the shoes of the consumer, think through the journey, and then try and make it as holistic an experience as you can. So it's basics sometimes that come together that delight versus, you know, the big powwow things.
Sure.
I feel.
Bidhan, are you feeling that with, as in when your salespeople meet customers, customers already quite well informed?
Lot. So there was a survey that was done, and it was an independent survey, not by Cisco. I don't remember exactly who was it, and a couple of years back, and it was found out that close to 40% of enterprise customers that buy enterprise solutions have already researched and have formed some kind of an opinion before they even pick up the phone and talk to a salesperson. Now, that may look pretty less, but just imagine those 40% could have formed an opinion which is not in your favor. So in that curiosity stage, or probably even prior to that curiosity, the customer getting into that curiosity stage, you need to try and see how you engage with those prospects. How do you really build across your brand preference and various other things. And there are multiple interactions that happens with the brand, whether we know it or we do not know it, that all adds up to for them to build some curiosity for your brand, and at the same point of time build some yes or a no. Yeah. And one of the other things that was very uniquely found out, and it's probably happening in the last 3-4 years more than before, is that what do my peers think about a particular product before even I buy a product? So the peer reviews for a particular product has taken across significantly higher play today. And obviously, that hinges upon things like what kind of a thought leadership that a particular brand brings across, irrespective of howsoever small need that I wanted to cater of mine through a particular product or a service, the user still has got a very higher plane in terms of that what's the thought leadership this company stands for. And it's very surprising to know that even, like I interact with a lot of startup companies, and at some point in time, a lot of startup companies did not think about too much onto the social impact. And today, it's right on probably the top 2 or top 3 things in their mind, along with revenue or customer acquisition, the social impact. And that's all because of that, how the consumers look at you as a company, not just catering to a specific need through a product or a service, but how you're catering to the overall landscape. They don't want you to ask me a question.
So what did you tell us what you think?
So I guess, okay, the question was the same, by the way. So I guess our position is slightly different. We're not really a consumer goods player here. So I think there are two sort of like ways where when customer makes a decision after doing some research for the purchasing, and the other part is a post-purchasing period. Generally, general insurance product is actually somewhat comparable with other insurance players, but the life insurance product is pretty complicated. So it's going to be very difficult from customer side to do their own research. But I think the way we want to leverage our data isn't really about the purchasing decision. It's more around once the policy purchase has been done from customer side, because the life insurance is more the long-term sort of product. We want to use the data in an efficient manner so that how we can actually understand customer needs better and how we can actually better engage customer based on their life stage. Because when they actually purchase, when the customer purchased our product, it could be the early marriage status, but sooner or later they will have a kids, education, and retirement. It's all like a life stage. So I think for us, more importance of using the data is more about how we actually communicate with the customer moving forward as a part of our journey as a long-term partner.
Okay, thanks a lot. Naomi, do we have any questions that we need to answer? Any questions from the audience? No? Any questions from Ryan's fan club?
For him only.
Anyone wants to join Richa's fan club? There you go. Okay, so let's then, I have another question for you guys. Let me ask you a specific question. Ryan, so when you were talking about how you can use data to deliver better value, how do you make sure that the connected consumer knows that you are using what you're learning from them? So how do we as an industry incentivize customers to tell us more so we can deliver better value?
So connected world means sometimes customer, without even noticing, we're already collecting those data. I'm not saying that we're actually doing that, but there is a couple of good examples. I guess a company like LG Electronics, they actually made a strategic decision 2-3 years ago to put a sensor in every single consumer electronic goods they're actually developing for two purposes. One is, the sensor itself doesn't get connected to the any real-time sort of communication, so there's no security breach. But I think the company had made a strategic direction like that to understand more about their product. So when there's a breakdown and when there is a contract with the enterprise players, using that sensor, company can actually understand what the performance is like and where the customer pain points are. And I think it was a bold move, because by putting single sensor in every module, which can be like 100 different sensors in one, like an air conditioner machine, for example, it's actually destroyed their margin. So this is another way of example of collecting the data from customer side at one go. But the end goal for that was probably to provide customer with a better value so that they can actually improve the product over the time. Coming back to our own industry, we actually have a clear channel to collect customer data, which is our own channel. I don't think we're there, up there yet. The technology is there, But in terms of engagement, in terms of like ecosystem, whole environment is still evolving. So now that we're, as I said, we're living the very exciting time frame with the 5G and also smart TV and new technologies. So technologies that is there, as long as we have a right sort of ecosystem built for insurance, perhaps we can actually have a direct relationship with the hospital, payment company, and insurance company. I think this is the probably way for us to actually provide best claim experience for the customer, and this is more about the convenience. And once we actually have that, and once customer feels that, initially they will get it reflected into our NPS score, and secondly, people will understand how we actually use data in an efficient manner for our customer.
Thank you, Ryan. And you've taken up the last of our time. So I'll just like to leave the audience with one thing. As a marketer, it's not just about picking up signals about what your consumer is doing, it's about actually using it effectively. And if you have connected consumers, it's not a bad thing. You give them stuff to learn, and that content will help you sell. Thank you very much. Thank you for my panelists.
Thank you.
Please give them a big hand.
Thank you very much, Krishnan.